Arizona Territory, 1879, the first time the wind caught her shawl and sent it tumbling into the street. No one moved to help her. Zinnia Kade bent to retrieve it herself, fingers brushing the dust as the townspeople moved around her like she did not exist, or worse, like she was cursed. She knew their whispers. They followed her like a shadow. That girl brings death, first her parents, then her sister. She was the only one to walk out of that house alive. And now, here in the worn-out mining town of Grafton's Hollow, they said it again every time a horse went lame or a baby was born sick. They said it when the banker's barn caught fire and when the preacher's wife slipped and broke her neck on the church steps. Zinnia was 19. She had no husband, no family, no prospects, just a threadbare shawl, a room above the general store she cleaned to afford, and a pair of worn boots that pinched her toes. She had learned to keep her head low and her voice quiet until the cowboy rode into town. He came in atop a tall, ash-colored gelding, the late afternoon sun behind him. Dust curled around his boots as he dismounted in front of the saloon, his hat tilted forward, hiding his eyes. He moved like a man who did not rush but got things done anyway. Zinnia was sweeping the front stoop of the store when he passed. He glanced her way once, just once. But it was not the kind of look she was used to. It was not wary, not suspicious. It did not blame her for the broken things in the world, it just looked. And something in her chest tightened for the first time in years. He asked for a room at the boarding house and gave his name to the old widow who ran it. Wesley Everett, he said. He could have gone anywhere, but he stayed. By the third day, he had fixed the broken hitching post outside the livery. By the fifth, he had tamed the wild-eyed Mustang that had thrown 3 men and nearly trampled a child. The town started nodding at him when he passed. A few even smiled. Zinnia kept sweeping, kept her head low, but she saw him watching her sometimes, not in a way that made her skin crawl, just like he was. Curious, it was on the 8th day that everything changed. A boy named Abel ran through the street, barefoot and screaming. "Help. My sister, she fell in the well." Wesley was off his horse before the boy finished the sentence. People gathered, but no one moved. The well was old, narrow, dangerous. Zinnia was already running by the time others started murmuring. She knew that well. It sat behind the old church, half hidden by scrub. She had warned children to stay away. She got there just as Wesley was tying a rope around his waist. The boy was sobbing. "She is only 5. Please." Wesley looked down at the narrow shaft, then at Zinnia. "I need a steady hand on the rope." She nodded and grabbed the other end. "I trust you," he said, just 3 words, but something in her cracked. No one had ever told her that before. He lowered himself into the dark and she braced her feet and held tight. The rope burned her palms, but she did not flinch. Minutes passed, then a voice echoed up. "Pull." She heaved. The rope dragged heavy, then a girl's voice, a weak cry. The townsfolk had arrived by then. They helped haul them both out. The girl coughing, Wesley covered in mud but whole. Alive. The boy flung himself into his sister's arms. The townspeople clapped Wesley on the back. Zinnia stood apart, but Wesley walked straight to her. "You held steady," he said. "I was not going to let go." He nodded. "I know." That night he found her sitting on the back steps of the store watching the stars. "You saved her," she said softly. He shrugged. "You did too." She looked at him. "They will still talk. They are fools." She laughed, a small, surprised sound. "You do not even know me." He sat beside her. "I know what I see." "And what is that?" He paused. "A girl who does not flinch, who runs toward trouble, who holds steady. They say I am bad luck. I say they are wrong." She turned toward him, really looked. His eyes were deep-set, steady. There was something in them, something unshaken. "You do not scare easy," she said. "Not when it matters." She swallowed. "Why are you here, Wesley?" He looked away, then back at her. "Looking for land, something to build. Maybe something to believe in. And you think you will find that here?" His gaze was on her now. "I think I already have." Zinnia's heart thudded. She stood too fast. "Good night, Mr. Everett." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Kade." She lay awake that night, hands curled tight, his words circling her mind, something to believe in. The next morning, a woman from the church, a widow with a sharp tongue, stopped Zinnia outside the store. "I suppose it was just coincidence you were there when the girl fell." Just like always, Zinnia held her stare. I was there because someone needed help, the widow sniffed. You bring bad things, Zinnia, always have. Zinnia turned away, but Wesley was across the street, already walking toward her. He stopped in front of the widow. You owe the lady thanks, the woman blinked. I do not think she helped save that child. Wesley's voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. The widow huffed. People like her, there is nothing wrong with her, he said. She is good and brave. The widow left in a fluster. Zinnia stared at him. You should not have done that. I would do it again, her voice shook. Why? Because I believe in you, Zinnia swallowed hard. No one ever has. Wesley stepped closer. They should have. She could not speak. She just nodded once. That night he brought her a small wooden carving, a horse, simple but careful. His hands had made it, for you, he said, to remind you. Of what? That you are not cursed, you are strong. Her fingers closed around it. She looked up at him. Why are you being kind to me? Because you deserve it. Zinnia's breath caught. For the first time in years, something inside her started to thaw. He gave her the only gift she had ever needed, faith, and she was not going to let it go. The land around Grafton's Hollow dried out by late summer. The mesquites thinned toward the ridgelines, and the wind carried grit that settled in the seams of boots. Zinnia took to walking in the evenings when the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of apricots. Wesley caught up with her one of those dusks, boots crunching over the shale as he fell into step beside her without a word. She glanced over. You always this quiet? I talk when there's something worth saying. Zinnia slowed her pace. The road curved past the blacksmith's yard, then sloped down toward the creek, dry now except for a few stubborn pools. I suppose I've just grown used to silence, she said. His eyes traced the horizon. You walk alone out here most nights, fewer eyes. Fewer mouths. He nodded once, then reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. I've been looking at parcels. There's a stretch east of here, flat ground, good soil, small spring at the edge. She took the paper from his hand, careful not to brush his fingers. The map was roughly drawn, sketched in pencil over creased lines. A square marked with his initials lay at the center. You plan to build, she murmured. He looked at her directly. I plan to stay. Her breath caught, but she didn't let it linger long. You'll need help raising walls. It's more work than one man can manage. I thought of that. He hesitated, then added, I'd pay fair wages, room and board too. She looked up. You offering me the job, I'm offering you a place to belong. Zinnia folded the paper back along its worn creases. I don't know how to build a house. I do, you learn fast. She handed it back. You don't owe me anything, Wesley. I'm not offering out of debt. Her arms folded across her chest, more from habit than defiance. It's a strange thing having someone trust you. I don't think it should be. They reached the edge of the bluff where the creek split the land. A hawk circled above, wings cutting neat lines through the air. Zinnia's voice turned quiet. Do you have people back east? No one left worth writing to. She nodded slowly then, after a beat. There's no one to miss me either. He looked at her, not with pity, but something rooted. Then maybe we make something here. Just us? The words settled between them like dust after a long ride, soft, unhurried, certain. Later that week, he began clearing the land at dawn. Zinnia brought him water and a loaf she'd bartered from the baker's wife. He didn't stop working when she arrived, but he nodded his thanks, sweat already darkening the collar of his shirt. She sat with her back to a cottonwood and watched as he dug post holes, each movement measured and deliberate. When he paused to rest, she spoke without preamble. You ever think about what kind of life you want to build? He wiped his brow with the sleeve of his shirt. One with quiet mornings, honest work, maybe someone to share it with. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. You ever think that person might not be who everyone expects? I don't give a damn what anyone expects. She looked at him then, really looked the way his jaw set when he meant his words, the way his hands remained steady even when his voice didn't rise. I'm not easy, Wesley. I'm not asking you to be. She stood and dusted off her skirt. I'll help you raise the frame. I've never hammered a beam in my life, but I'll try. He gave her a slow glance, something quiet turning behind his eyes. You help me build it, Zinnia. It'll be yours too. She didn't answer. just nodded once and walked back toward town, her steps lighter than they'd been in years. By the time August edged into September, the house had ribs beams rising against the sky like the bones of something being born. Zinnia learned to wield a hammer, to balance on scaffolding, to laugh when a board splintered beneath her grip. Wesley never hovered. He showed her once, then stepped back, letting her find her own rhythm. One evening, as they stood beneath the half-built roof, she passed him a plank and said, "I used to think I'd die in that room above the store." He looked over, his hands steady on the nails. "And now, I'm starting to wonder if I might live somewhere else." He didn't smile, but his voice softened. "I'd like that." She stepped down the ladder and brushed her hands on her apron. "I should go before the light fades." He watched her go, but didn't call after her. That night, she didn't walk straight back to town. Instead, she paused at the edge of the frame they'd built. It wasn't finished. It didn't even have a roof, but something about it felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever stood. The next morning, the town's doctor sent for her. His wife was expecting, and the midwife had taken ill. Zinnia had no training, but she had calm hands and a way of speaking that steadied, panicked breath. She washed up, tied her hair back, and walked through the front door without hesitation. Hours later, the doctor's wife delivered a red-faced, squalling boy. Zinnia held him to her chest until he stilled. The doctor looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You've got a gift," he said. She didn't answer, just handed the child to his mother and slipped out the door. Wesley was waiting by the cottonwood when she returned. She hadn't told him where she'd gone, but he seemed to know. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, eyes tired but bright. "I helped someone today." "You've been helping people since the day I met you." She stepped closer. "They don't say it, but their eyes are changing. Let them. You never needed their approval. I needed someone to see me." He reached out, not to pull her close, but just to brush her hand with his. "I do." She didn't flinch. That night, she returned to the half-built house and stood beneath the open sky. She could still feel the weight of the newborn against her arms and the warmth of Wesley's hand lingering against her fingertips. Something had shifted, irrevocably, and this time she didn't turn away from it. By mid-September, the roof was on. Zinnia stood beneath it, palms resting against the raw edge of a window frame, watching the last streaks of orange disappear behind the hills. The walls still needed chinking, but the place was starting to hold its own against the wind. Wesley was outside, splitting cedar boards with a drawknife. His shirt sleeves were rolled, hands moving with quiet control. The rhythm of it had become familiar in the way certain things settle into the body without asking permission. Zinnia stepped outside, the hem of her skirt brushing sawdust. "There's a widow north of here, name of Alma Fletch. She's got a kiln and a knack for glazing tile, says she'll trade roof shingles for flour and cloth." Wesley didn't pause his work. "You already spoke with her." She offered me tea, talked about her daughter in Prescott. "Said she could use help glazing if I was willing." He looked up then, the grain of the wood catching light between them. "You thinking about learning it?" "I'm thinking I'd like to know how to make something that lasts." He leaned the split board against the frame. "If you want that, you'll have it." Zinnia knelt to gather the wood shavings, brushing them into a basin. "You ever build a place from the ground before? This is the first I've built for myself." She stood, tucking the basin against her hip. "And me?" Wesley looked at her long enough that she felt it through her ribs. "It's the first I've built with someone I trust." She didn't answer, but the basin in her hands felt lighter than it had a moment before. When the equinox came, Zinnia brought seeds in a sack tied from muslin okra, squash, beans. She laid them out on the table Wesley had planed smooth from juniper planks. "Didn't know you planned to garden," he said, watching her sort them by shape. "I didn't either." "But they came from a woman in town who said her mother carried them west in a tin box wrapped in flannel. Seems wrong to let them die in a drawer." He watched her fingers move across the cloth. "You ever plant anything before?" "No," she admitted. "But I know what it is to keep something alive that wants to quit. That ought to count for something." Wesley stepped beside her. "We'll dig rows tomorrow. Use the runoff from that spring when the rains come. You say that like you know they're coming." "I know enough to hope." She smiled without meaning to. "You always like this?" He raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Certain, even when nothing around you is." He didn't answer right away. I've seen what happens when you stop believing things can get better. I don't plan on going back there. Zinnia folded the muslin and tied it shut. Then I won't either. The next day, they dug trenches by hand. The soil was stubborn, but she worked until her back ached and dirt caked the nails of both hands. Wesley didn't correct her form or hurry her pace. He worked beside her, steady and wordless, until the last row was done. That evening, she rinsed her arms at the creek's edge and let her feet dangle in the shallow pool. Wesley crouched nearby, tossing pebbles into the water, watching the ripples fade. You ever think about what comes after this? He asked. Zinnia leaned back on her palms. After the walls go up. After the crops rise or don't, he nodded. She stared out across the dusk. I used to think I'd never get past surviving, but now I wonder what it would feel like to wake up and not brace for something to go wrong. Wesley drew a line through the damp sand with his boot heel. You've earned peace. Maybe, but peace doesn't come knocking. No, he said. But sometimes it shows up in a half-built house and a patch of stubborn earth. She turned to face him. You ever been in love? He didn't flinch. Once, a long time ago. She didn't wait. Zinnia's gaze softened. I would have. Wesley looked at her then, not like a man trying to guess what came next, but like someone recognizing something already certain. I know. She didn't look away. I'm not afraid of the work, Wesley. I'm not afraid of the storms or the quiet or even the way people look at me when they think I'm not watching. But I am afraid of needing something and not knowing if I'll be allowed to keep it. He moved closer, slow and deliberate until their knees touched. Then I'll say it plain. I want a life with you in it, not just for the planting or the building or because you were the only one who didn't look away when things got hard, but because you're the one I believe in. Zinnia's throat tightened, but she didn't turn from it. You want to marry me? I do, he said. Not someday, not if things settle. Just because I love you and I want to build a life you can finally call your own. She took his hand, warm and calloused as her own. Then you have me. The last light faded from the sky, but neither of them moved. The water ran over smooth rock behind them, and the land, for the first time in either of their memories, felt still. The wedding was quiet, no preacher, no church. Just the low slope of the ridge where the wind came soft through the yucca and the soil smelled of mesquite and rain. Wesley stood beside her with his hair still damp from washing in the creek, and Zinnia wore a plain cotton dress she had sewn herself, the hem uneven where her needle had refused to follow a straight line. Alma Fletch came with a basket of sweetbread and a pot of sage tea. She said the words, hands trembling only slightly as she read from a worn page she said once belonged to her father. No one else from town came, but Zinnia didn't check for them. She had stopped waiting for their blessings. After Alma left, Wesley and Zinnia stayed up on that ridge, sitting on a wool blanket Wesley had carried over his shoulder. He handed her a strip of dried apple and said nothing for a long while. Zinnia watched the sun sink behind the range, its light catching the faint gold in the thread she'd stitched along her sleeve. Feels like something's settled, she said. Doesn't have to be loud to be real. She leaned into him, shoulder against his. I never used to picture this. A day like today, I didn't think I was allowed to. You don't need permission anymore. No, I don't. They didn't go back to town that night. They stayed in the house they'd built, its walls still smelling of cedar and earth. When the wind picked up, it rattled one of the shutters loose, and Wesley rose to fasten it. Zinnia watched him move through the dimness, the lamplight catching the ridge of his profile, and felt something inside her stretch wide and still. The next morning, she rose before him. She stirred cornbread batter in the metal bowl they'd bartered from the tinker and let it bake slow while the sky brightened. Wesley came out barefoot, rubbing his jaw. You always wake with the sun, not always. But I like the quiet before it all begins. He kissed her cheek, slow and certain, and poured water into the basin without a word. By mid-morning, a rider came up the road, dust trailing behind like a flag. Zinnia stepped out with her sleeves rolled, squinting against the glare. She recognized the sheriff's boy, Reed, his hat too big and his boots too stiff. He pulled up the gelding. Sheriff wants to see you, Wesley. Said it's about that land claim north of the ridge. Wesley wiped his hands. I'll come. Zinnia didn't speak until the boy had ridden off. Is there trouble? Could be, or just someone making noise. She handed him his coat. You want me to come? No, you stay, I won't be long. He rode out before noon. By the time the sun reached its highest point, Zinnia had hung linens to dry and swept the porch twice. She wasn't nervous, not exactly, but her hands felt restless. The sun had dipped just past its peak when she heard hooves again. She stepped out, expecting Wesley, but it was Alma, her face drawn and her bonnet askew. There's talk, Alma said before she'd even dismounted. Some man from Prescott saying the land was promised to his cousin years back. He's come with papers. Sheriffs holding both claims till they sort it. Zinnia didn't blink. Wesley's still in town. He's at the jailhouse. Won't leave till he knows what's true. Zinnia untied her apron. Then I'll go too. Alma reached for her arm. This is men's business, girl. No, Zinnia said. It's mine too. She rode one of Alma's mules, steady and slow, the road dry beneath its hooves. When she reached town, the streets were quiet, heat pressing down like a lid. She found Wesley inside the sheriff's office, standing beside a man in a gray coat with slicked hair and polished boots. The sheriff looked up. Mrs. Everett. Zinnia didn't correct him. Wesley stepped toward her. They're claiming the boundary marker was moved. That it cuts across the lower end of our plot. She studied the man beside him. You have proof. The man held out a paper, the ink faded and the seal smeared. Zinnia didn't reach for it. Where's the original marker? She asked instead. The sheriff pointed toward the ridge. Still there. Stone with a chisel mark. I want to see it. Wesley's eyes flicked to hers, then back to the sheriff. We'll all go. They rode out as dusk settled. The marker stood just where Wesley had said it would, flat stone, chisel cut deep. Zinnia knelt beside it, running her fingers over the mark. Then she stepped back, pointing to a shallow trench in the soil. Root lines grown over on this side, she said. See how the grass curves around it. It's been here longer than any recent move. The sheriff crouched beside her. You sure? I've watched enough seasons turn to know what fresh soil looks like. This isn't it. The man from Prescott paled. That don't prove nothing. It proves enough, the sheriff said, standing. Claim stands with the Everetts. You can take it to court if you like, but you'll lose. The man rode off without another word. Wesley's hand found hers as the others turned back toward town. You saw what I didn't. You weren't looking for lies, she said. He nodded once. But you were. That night, they stood outside the house again, the lantern flickering against the window glass. Zinnia leaned into the doorway, arms crossed. I never thought a name would mean anything to me, she said. But when the sheriff said it, Mrs. Everett, it felt like something I'd waited a long time to hear. Wesley brushed a strand of wind-blown hair from her cheek. It's yours, every part of it. She looked out past the porch, where the rows they'd planted waited for rain. Feels like we're not just building a house anymore. No, he said, we're building a life. And this time she believed it. Autumn settled with a softness that surprised them both. The heat broke one morning without fanfare, and for the first time in weeks, dew clung to the porch railings. Zinnia wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped outside before the sun rose. The fields stretched quiet and gold, the rows of squash thick with bloom. Wesley was already out by the barn, hammering the last latch into place on the gate. She crossed the yard with a tin mug in hand, steam curling from its rim. I didn't hear you leave, she said, offering it. I didn't want to wake you. She leaned against the post beside him, watching the morning come alive. Alma says the first frost won't touch us for another 2 weeks. We'll have to bring in the beans before then, he nodded. I'll take the west row if you want the lower. They stood in a quiet that felt earned. Later that day, Zinnia walked to the far end of the field where the spring-fed channel curved past a patch of wild asters. She stooped to gather them, hands careful, eyes steady. Not for any reason she could name at first. But as she turned the stems in her fingers, she thought of the windowsill at home and how it would look a little fuller with something blooming there. When she returned, Wesley was splitting kindling beneath the cottonwood. She watched him work for a moment, then stepped close. Do you ever miss the road? She asked. He set the hatchet down. There were years I didn't think I could stop moving. Now I can't picture leaving. You never talk about what came before here. There isn't much worth saying. but you carry it still." He hesitated, then nodded. "There was a war. I was too young when I joined, too old by the time I walked away. I buried friends in places I could never find again. After, I wandered. I worked cattle, freighted supplies, rode dispatch, but nothing held. And now," he looked up at her, steady and quiet, "now I've got something I'd fight to keep." Zinnia sat beside him on the bench he'd built from pine boards. "I've thought of leaving before, years ago when the whispers got too thick and the looks too sharp, but I didn't have anywhere to go. You do now." She looked toward the hills. "I never imagined I'd grow roots." "You didn't. You grew wings first, then planted when you were ready." She rested her hand on his knee, fingers brushing the worn denim. "You think we'll last? I think we already have." That evening, they brought in the first of the harvest. Zinnia washed the beans in a wooden basin while Wesley stacked the bushels near the stove. The warmth that filled the house wasn't just from the fire, it came from the scent of earth and labor, and the way their bodies moved in rhythm without needing to speak. When the beans were strung to dry and the light had faded, Zinnia lit the lamp and set 2 bowls on the table. "I want to build something more," she said as they ate, "not just for us, for others like us." Wesley glanced up. "What do you mean, there are women in town?" "Ones who have lost men or never had them. They work hard, but no one sees them. I could teach them how to tend soil, how to trade what they grow. We could spare the seed." He leaned back. "You do that, teach them. I think they'd come. If they saw it was real." He reached across the table and took her hand, rough from work, but warm. "Then we'll make room, the land can take it." That night, the wind shifted. Zinnia woke to it and found Wesley already sitting up, listening. She reached for his hand. "Just weather," he said. But she could tell it stirred something deeper, not fear, memory. "Will you lie back?" she asked. He did, and she fitted herself against him, her cheek to his chest. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said. "Whatever it is." "I know," he whispered. "I've got you now," and she knew he meant it. Weeks passed, and the mornings grew colder. The last of the squash came in, and Zinnia spent hours at the stove, boiling and drying, storing what they'd need for the months ahead. Women from town began to visit, first one, then two. They brought jars of preserves and left with packets of seed. Wesley built shelves for Zinnia's root cellar. He added a second cot in the back room for visitors who stayed too late. He replaced the cracked window pane with one he'd bartered from the glass gutter in town. One evening, as the last light dipped below the ridge, Zinnia stepped onto the porch with a wool blanket over her shoulders. Wesley was mending a harness near the steps. "I saw the sheriff," she said. "He asked if we'd consider selling the beans through the general store come spring. Do you want to?" I said yes. He nodded. "Then we will." Zinnia sat beside him on the steps. "I never thought peace would look like this. Dirt beneath my nails, a warm stovepipe. A man beside me who listens more than he speaks. I never thought I'd stay anywhere long enough to be known. And now," he turned to her, "now I want to be known by you every day we've got left." She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. "That's all I want." When winter came, they were ready. The house held firm against the wind. The cellar stayed full. Women visited every week, some with children, some alone. Zinnia taught them how to read the sky, how to track frost, how to bargain without apology. Wesley built a second barn for storage. He carved a new sign for the front gate that simply read, "Everett." They didn't mark anniversaries or keep track of dates. Time passed by the work they did and the rest they earned. One clear morning in March, Zinnia stood on the porch with a baby tucked against her chest. He was small but strong, with Wesley's calm eyes and her thick hair. Wesley stepped beside her, one hand brushing the child's back. "You think he'll like it here?" she asked. "I think he already does." The sun crested the ridge, casting light over the field where new rows waited to be planted. Behind them, the house stood solid, its roof shining clean in the morning. Zinnia looked up at Wesley, her voice soft. "We built this." "We did," he said. "And we'll keep building." The wind passed gentle through the grass, and the land around them felt sure, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs, earned, protected, and full of promise. And in that stillness, with their son asleep between them and the fields stretching wide and ready, Zinnia and Wesley knew they had everything they needed, and they always would.